Got crazy hair this morning. It's kind of mad. But I wanted to talk about something because I didn't get a great sleep last night, as you can see from my eyes. However, it could have been worse because I could have had a seizure last night. I was experiencing this kind of low-level seizure activity, and I just couldn't sleep. It was really difficult to sleep because of that. But then it's difficult to sleep because of that, and then lack of sleep can make it worse. So there was this horrible kind of cycle, this vicious cycle that could have got worse. And the only way I was thinking, how can I reverse it? And then I thought of just something that works for me quite often, which is I took exogenous ketones and it went away. I was able to reverse the seizure activity. And then I just eventually went to sleep. And I've woken up and I feel I don't have those symptoms. I'm just normally tired. Which, to feel normally tired is really nice, because when I feel normally tired for me, often that means I have more seizure activity. And I find that people have been criticizing exogenous ketones a lot recently, saying they're pretty useless and all this stuff. But for me, it can be a lifesaver. When I am slipping out of my therapeutic zone for blood ketones and blood glucose, maybe if I'm stressed, or it's often not to do with food. It's usually just from, things like stress and a low mood, exposures like I mentioned before with paint fumes, and things like that can actually even cause brain tumours to form. There's certain chemicals, I mentioned this before, vinyl chloride and other compounds have been really strongly associated with brain cancer formation. It's quite scary. But there are all these cancer clusters that you can look at that show that there's a strong association, and also people's occupations. So if you're a mechanic, if you work on a building site, and if you work with those kinds of chemicals, especially if you're not using any kind of mask to protect your respiration, your breathing, then you will be inhaling all these volatile particles and these things you shouldn't really be inhaling, and your risk is dependent upon partly your genes, because you can look at polymorphisms that show you that you're more prone to the effects of things like overcooked meat and exposure to these, even things like smoking. Your risk of smoking, there are certain people who have genes that appear to, the way that they're methylated, it appears to help them so that they actually aren't affected by things like smoking. And then another person might just smoke a little bit and they'd be affected by that really badly, which is, I always found that quite interesting. But then they're not completely protected, because it would affect their children and their grandchildren from their bad behaviors. But I just wanted to say exogenous ketones can be a lifesaver for some people, so don't completely criticize them. The other thing is, people say that they don't help for weight loss and other applications, but I don't think that's strictly true either, because I think they can help for weight loss, and I think they can help for altering brain chemistry for people who may be emotional eaters, or just people who have depression and that's affecting their ability to have the body composition they want, or just to feel good. I find that for me, I have a history of depression, and if I almost get into that, even on a ketogenic diet, sometimes I can be prone to these depressive episodes. And if I take exogenous ketones, it can help me. Now, these aren't the exogenous ketones that have caffeine and flavorings or all these things. Sometimes I can have organic stevia, it's not a problem for me, which is good. But if I have the other kind, it is. And I can tell it tastes different. And I don't have it all the time as well. That's a key thing. Even these exogenous ketones, I don't have them all the time. I just have them when I feel this seizure activity that I know won't be controlled by diet or biofeedback from altering my activity, the stimuli around me, and just being in this meditative state where I'm breathing, focusing on my breathing. It's more like Buteyko breathing, where I just really focus on how I'm breathing and not breathing through my mouth so much, and really focusing on just taking in the air and holding it, and breathing through my nose and all this stuff. And that really helps me. I can reverse seizures that way. But then when I can detect that that's not going to be it, I need more, and I'm going out of my therapeutic zone. When I measure my blood ketones, when I'm going out of my known therapeutic zone that manages my seizure activity, then that's the best thing for me, to have exogenous ketones, and it works brilliantly. And I do factor it in with my my macronutrients. So some people, if they don't do that, they probably could get fat. Probably could get fat having exogenous ketones, as well as all their other food on top of that. But I factor in with my macronutrients, and I have unintentionally lost weight when I've had exogenous ketones routinely. I do use them just strategically now when I need them, and that's when I feel like I'm having this seizure activity. And often I have that seizure activity when my circadian rhythms are slightly off, because that makes me more prone to having seizures at certain times. This seizure activity is focal seizures. So it's when I get these weird sensations, and if I was to let it progress, it could become a grand mal seizure, but it doesn't, because I usually know what the trigger is and I try and reverse it. Just over the years, I've worked out all my triggers and how to reverse them. It can be quite difficult, but I can have really good control of them if I get into a habit of sleeping at the right time, waking up at the right time, eating at the right times and the right kinds of foods, staying away from those exposures, having walks in the park where I'm away from Wi-Fi and all this stuff that's constantly making my brain active in that part of the brain, the speech and movement area. Just, yeah, it can be quite exhausting at times, but if I have a good routine, I feel fantastic for a long time. But my routine recently has gradually gotten worse, and I've been trying to remedy that in various ways. I do know that it's just like medicine, having these exogenous ketones, and while they're very effective for me, I need to treat the underlying causes. So I need to establish that sleep routine, but in the meantime, having those exogenous ketones will help me to do that, because if I'm not able to sleep because I'm having this low-level seizure activity, and the lack of sleep from it disturbing my ability to sleep is making it worse, then remedying that in the short term will definitely allow me to get better sleep. And then I can now, from this point now, see, I'm a bit tired, but I feel good. Apart from that, I'll feel completely fine in a while. I feel fine now, it's just I feel tired. But normally when I feel tired, I have this horrible seizure activity, and I feel fine now. I just need to spend the rest of the day just relaxing, and then I'll feel fine. It just makes me feel really weird. But when I did use exogenous ketones routinely, that also gave me problems, I found. So, like I said, there's a dose that's good for each individual who wants to do it for the reasons that I am outlaying. I also think they can help with weight loss if that's your aim, because they can help to satiate you. They can be quite satiating. Ketones have that effect, and exogenous ketones also have that effect. So it's not just endogenously that can give you that benefit, you can yield that benefit from, but in my opinion, and from my experiences, they do have a satiating effect for me, and they have helped me with fasts. So when I started fasting, even though normally on a ketogenic diet, for me, on a well-formulated ketogenic diet that's dense in these micronutrients, has a nice, micronutrient density and profile, I don't feel hungry. But with exogenous ketones, I was able to prolong my fast. When I did my 9-day fast, the reason it was 9 days is because I couldn't push past the 9th day. I was aiming for 10, but I had a breakthrough seizure on the 10th day. And a breakthrough seizure is a seizure that just happens out of the norm. And in that case, it was caused by an electrolyte imbalance, but also because I have a brain injury, because there's scar tissue there, the seizure was also caused by not having the feeding phase. Fasting, yes, it can be neuroprotective and it can help your brain to heal. But if you have brain damage, your brain is also crying out for the energy that it needs from those fats and from the choline, and the cholesterol will help it too, the dietary cholesterol, and these fat-soluble vitamins, and these everything it needs to, these amino acids, these ketogenic amino acids in particular, everything it needs to heal, it will require. So if you're recovering from any kind of brain injury, you don't want to fast for too long and too much. Or if you do fast, the most important part of that isn't necessarily the fasting. It's often the feeding. When you feed again, you have to feed again with foods that will help your brain to recover. And when I do that, often I refeed with some type of oily fish, and I feel that's beneficial. I definitely do. Some type of oily fish, and usually turmeric with black pepper. Because what the turmeric does is it can help you to actually use that DHA from the oily fish, and the DHA is very good for the brain. That's also why eating brain is very good, because it has all the components that a healthy brain needs to thrive. Yeah, because obviously it is a brain, and the brain is mostly fat, and the fats in that are almost perfect for a healthy brain to thrive. Also, I eat sweetbreads, which also have a favorable fatty acid profile, which helps the brain to thrive. They're also very satiating. They're mostly fat, so the ratios for a ketogenic diet are excellent. If I check my blood ketones and blood glucose readings after eating sweetbreads, which is the pancreas of the animal, it's usually veal sweetbreads that I get. If you do that, it's an excellent ketogenic food. I've shown that in a few videos, just when I've played around testing the myoglobin from different meat sources and different organ meats. And I think on this channel, if you call it that, my story, I've shown that from brain and sweetbreads. And brain, there's not really much of an effect on an interesting result on the blood ketone readings. But on the sweetbreads, it definitely is. And that actually correlates with what happens after you eat it, which I found really interesting. So it's a definite good food for me. Also egg yolks, I think. So if after I've had a long fast, which is 3 days and over, or even if I have like a 2-day fast, I will have some oily fish, turmeric, egg yolks, or some type of organ meat like sweetbreads, and I will have more salt, but sometimes I react to salt if I have too much, which is interesting, because people always say, oh, you should have so much salt on a ketogenic diet, you should have more salt. But people are different. Some people, again, just if you have your genome sequenced, there are actually some polymorphisms that say you shouldn't have more salt or not. You can argue against that because they could be based on epidemiological data. I think we all should have more salt. I don't really necessarily actually agree with that. But some people need more than others, definitely. And if you're training or sweating a lot, then you probably should need even more salt. But I'm one of those people that seems to. I do need salt. I don't necessarily need to add salt to all of my meals. Especially if you have things like brain, because they're naturally salty. So yeah, exogenous ketones, not necessarily a bad thing. They can help you to fast and do all these things. So if I want to go on a long fast, halfway through or at certain points, I would need to have exogenous ketones to continue, because my brain needs that energy. The damaged part of my brain needs that energy, or I'll have a seizure after a while. It's not like normal epilepsy, it's a different kind of epilepsy. And even though that fasting stage is very important for healing and also ensuring the cancerous cells will not come back, you do need that energy. That damaged part of the brain does need those substrates to heal. Otherwise, it can just trigger a seizure, which you don't want if you have that kind of epilepsy. Because I had a brain hemorrhage, and that's what caused my epilepsy. It wasn't the tumour directly. So people often say, why do you have this epilepsy and why do you have these symptoms if there's no sign of any cancer there anymore? And I say, well, because it's a brain injury, it's not. It would be the same if I'd been in a a car accident and I'd hit my head, and it takes a very long time to heal. It has been healing. That scar tissue has been healing quite significantly, which is fantastic, because it wasn't supposed to. My symptoms are so much better than a few years ago, but it takes a very long time to heal properly, and it might never heal completely. I hope that it does, because that would be nice for having to not think about these things so much. And it has been improving over the years. It's just a very slow process, so hopefully that can continue. But in the meantime, I need to look after myself. I need to make sure I sleep well. I have gone on runs where I've had fantastic control of these symptoms, to the point where sometimes I think, oh, I don't have them anymore. It's fantastic. It's very low level, but I feel like it's not affecting my life. But then something will trigger it, like the paint fumes or stress, thinking too much about something, not spending enough time in nature. Speaking of which, I went on a long walk yesterday, and before the walk I wasn't feeling so good. I was having these symptoms, and halfway through the walk, well, half an hour into the walk, just the symptoms completely went away. And this has happened often to me. I've gone on a walk when I haven't been feeling good, and I've thought, oh, well, this could be a risk because I'm just having this low-level seizure activity. But then it lifts, and my blood ketones rise, my glucose goes down, just from this long walk. And I probably have an increase in BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and I'm feeling really good. I get this kind of buzz. You know how you might know if you go on a run, you can have this runner's high, and that's activating your endocannabinoid system. So you get a kind of a high from that. And I get that from long walks. So it doesn't have to be this intense exercise. I get it from these long walks, and I get this kind of high, and I've got loads of energy suddenly, and these symptoms have lifted. I feel fantastic and feel really good. And I used to have that in the gym, but then with certain activities, I would get this seizure activity, especially if I flex my left bicep. I can have some disturbance in the nerves around my face, and that's a kind of seizure activity, but it's triggered by flexing this arm. It's really funny. But sometimes it's more of a problem than others. But when I'm in the gym, and if I'm training more intensely, obviously when you do that, your blood sugar rises and everything goes a bit funny. And it's when I can't get enough oxygen to get rid of those waste products, and that's when I get my seizure threshold appears to decrease. And sometimes I've benefited from having exogenous ketones to continue with the exercise and the intensity. But again, I can't overdo it, because sometimes that doesn't work. And usually the times it doesn't work is if I'm doing it routinely, if I'm not treating the underlying cause, and if I'm not feeding my brain appropriately at the right times and having these fasting periods. So I'm not maintaining the proper, that managed insulin secretion throughout the day. And it's a tricky balance, because sometimes you do want a bit of this insulin being secreted, because brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps the brain to heal, is also partly dependent on IGF-1, which you don't want elevated too much if you have any kind of cancer, but you don't want it too low either, because your brain needs to heal, and you need some IGF-1 being secreted, like insulin-like growth factor, you do want that to a degree to help your brain to heal adequately. You need that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say, really. That I have benefited from exogenous ketones. And I don't have the ones with caffeine or anything because I can't do well with caffeine. Caffeine disrupts my sleep, and it's a beta-adrenergic receptor agonist, so it's just stimulatory, doesn't help me. It's too stimulatory. And I've tried adding this to try and offset the effects of caffeine. It's L-theanine. It's supposed to help to balance out those effects, but for me it doesn't really work. I've tried experiments with high doses of that and it doesn't work. Even low doses of the caffeine and high doses of the L-theanine doesn't work for me. It apparently works for some people, but not for me, even though I'm a rapid metabolizer of caffeine. But you experiment with all these things and see what works. I have a number of foods on the ketogenic diet that I do very well with, and others I don't do very well with. That's why I'm on a primarily carnivorous ketogenic diet, because that's what I do best with. I do have things like cayenne pepper, because the cayenne pepper has capsaicin, and that helps me to control the nerve pain that I get around my temporomandibular joint. It causes nerve pain that extends downwards all across my face, and also I'm affected on this whole side from the brain hemorrhage. You can see this eye is different to this eye. This eyebrow, I can't really raise it. So this one is always higher than that one. I've actually had this even before the brain tumor, but it got worse after, a lot worse. This eye used to be completely shut after my diagnosis. I could barely open it, and it just looked funny. And if I'm tired, that again, it's like it can get almost completely shut. I'm really tired making this video, but I'm thankful that I'm not tired in the way I can manage this. I'm not tired in the way that I can be if I have more seizure activity. I actually have next to zero seizure activity at the moment, which is as good as I'm going to get. This is the best that I can feel, even though I'm so tired. It's a funny thing. But I just wanted to communicate the fact that exogenous ketones can be a lifesaver for me. They really can. And I've had a lot on my mind at the moment, and that's the main reason that I had that time when I messed up my sleep, and it's had this domino effect on the other days, which has come to a head. It came to a head last night, and that's why I was struggling to sleep, and I was rescued by the exogenous ketones. I have the ones from Keto Sports, so it's not Prove It or any of these other companies. I find that that's the best one that works for me. I think also the electrolytes the salts that they use in that, what would you call it? Just in that, in the composition of the product, the electrolytes they use as this kind of carrier, I think you could call it. Just every ketone salt, every exogenous ketone preparation needs to have some type of salt with it. I think this one has mainly potassium, and it seems to benefit me more than other ketone salt preparations, other companies out there. And it benefits me more than it does things like caprylic acid or these other medium chain triglycerides. So it benefits me more than MCT oil, but sometimes the MCT oil and the caprylic acid are more beneficial for me. And I've worked out when that is for me and why. And I have a certain type of seizure activity that I know won't respond to the exogenous ketones, and that's interesting. I usually get a better response when I just have a feeling in my gut. It's really funny because I know that it's affecting my gut microbiome in some way. And that's hugely important because I have a kind of a semi-permeable blood-brain barrier from the damage that's there. So, yes, it helps to let things like the ketones, which do readily cross the blood-brain barrier, it helps them to cross the blood-brain barrier even more to attenuate for that damage that's there. It can actually help that damage that's from the blood-brain barrier too. But yes, it can help things like that and the fat-soluble vitamins and all this stuff get across the blood-brain barrier. However, being semi-permeable, it also has effects on the gut. There's that gut-brain relationship. Also has effects on my mood because so much serotonin resides in the gut, right? So again, that relationship. Having a brain injury can make you depressed sometimes. And the ketogenic diet can favorably alter brain chemistry, which has helped me tremendously with my mood. And sometimes I need a bit of a help with those exogenous ketones. My therapeutic zone is lower than it was before, which is showing that maybe I'm healing or I'm better able to use those ketones over time. Because I've been doing this for a number of years now. I'm nearly at year 6, which is quite nice. Since my diagnosis, year 6. But yeah, things are going to be going well. And I'm going to get back into the exercise. I was doing well with that. I need to get back into it. And I may need the assistance of exogenous ketones just to help me along, and then I'll wean off them. And that's what I did before. It was very good. But if I stay on them too long, it's not good for me. But in the meantime, they're very nice to have. And when you take them, I would say it's good to know the amount that helps you. Don't go with the recommended amount. Well, do as a maximum, but you might need a lot less to have the effect that you want. I don't require to have the recommended amount. I can have a lot less, and it gives me a great effect. I've also been having my frankincense essential oil sublingually under the tongue. That helps me tremendously too, but again, I need to treat the underlying cause of that. So I need to spend less time in front of computer screens and artificial light, because that is that gives you more neuroinflammation. And yes, you can attenuate that with red light therapy, looking into it can help, because the eyes are an extension of the brain, and if you have the red light going into the retina, it can combat that neuroinflammation. Also have my blue light blockers. They block blue and green light, I think. So yeah, that helps me, but not completely. I need to completely get away from these artificial lights, completely, as much as I can. And if I am exposed to it, I need to wear my blue light blockers, establish a good sleep routine. And I have been trying to do that, all those things, and I have been doing all those things, but sometimes I need that extra assistance, and yesterday I needed that. I couldn't not have the exogenous ketones, it would have just got worse. So it rescued me, as I said, and I'm thankful for it. So all these people saying they're useless, they're definitely not useless, but they could be useless if you misuse them. It's like a drug, really. You can misuse any kind of drug. Even caffeine. You know, caffeine can be beneficial, but people can misuse caffeine. Would you say that caffeine is completely useless? No, you wouldn't say it's completely useless. It has benefits, but if you have too much caffeine, or if you have caffeine too often, I think that caffeine's a nice analogy with these exogenous ketones. Even though you don't endogenously create caffeine, you endogenously have hormones like cortisol, which if you have caffeine, you can have elevated cortisol, which isn't always a bad thing. But if you're constantly drinking caffeine, if you're constantly having caffeine and drinking coffee, things like that, it's not necessarily a good idea. It can disrupt your sleep. But in my case, I am very thoughtful with how I don't have caffeine, but sometimes I have 100% cacao, just because I like it. But I don't have too much of it again, and I'm very careful with when and how I have it. And with the exogenous ketones, I can't stress the point enough that you need to count it in with your macros. I just count it as fat, and I look at the label and I see how many calories it is and all this. So I don't necessarily count it as fat. I count it like a fourth macronutrient, which is how it's sometimes marketed as. Well, not really marketed, but sometimes it's how it's mentioned as, yeah. So yeah, I'll have another one of my walks today, because that's something that I've been missing that definitely helps me. And I'll stay away from those exposures, all those fumes and pollution and all that horrible stuff. I've been in central London too much. It's a horrible atmosphere for me. See, it's not just diet. I have all these other exposures, and because I have that permeable blood-brain barrier, which is being stubborn to heal, I'm having the healing of all the scar tissue, but it's just that area with the blood-brain barrier, and where I have that scar here, just very stubborn. Things like temperature changes and these volatile particles in the air. I've got my air purifier there that helps me, and I do have my frankincense essential oil, which I take, which helps me tremendously. I've tried cannabis oil too, that helps me to a degree, but not as much as I thought it would. And all these things that I apply, I'm thinking of adding an afternoon nap, because I get very tired early evening, and I keep myself awake because it's too early to go to sleep. But it's getting dark so early that I get so tired. In the summer it's easy because I go to sleep when the sun sets, I wake up when the sun rises. It's this nice thing. But during the winter, I really struggle with that. And there's a rhythmicity with people with the seizure threshold. People are more prone to seizures at certain times. Everyone has a seizure threshold, as I mentioned in a previous video. Even people who are they have this complete integrity in their blood-brain barrier, everything's working fantastically well, and they don't have an accumulation of these free radicals, this reactive oxygen species. They don't have an accumulation of that which is impacting them. Well, often people do, because we live in these toxic environments and we have stress and all these things. But even if you don't have brain injury or anything that gives you epilepsy, any kind of epileptic disorder, you have a seizure threshold. And don't know where I was going with that, but everyone can help, everyone can be aided by combating neuroinflammation, and that has an effect on things you might have not considered, like your weight and your mood and all these other things, and your gut health, the brain and gut. Every thought and feeling you have in here can affect your gut microbiome. So try and think as positively as you can. Try and do things that make you think positively, because you can't, it's not always about willpower. You can't just force yourself to think positively. You can frame things in a positive way and have a positive perspective on things. You can be quite philosophical, which is what I try to be. I try to be philosophical about things like death and suffering and all these things. And I do believe in a kind of God of sorts, but it's not this religious God. It's a religious type of God. It's something that I will never really understand, I don't think, or be able to comprehend in any appreciable way, any kind of, I'm just kind of rambling now, but I think it's important to have these things, to think about these things, and to also try to have absence of thought. Just take yourself away, go on these long walks. I think that's partly why these long walks help me too, because I find that it gets all that negative energy away from me. And it's hugely helpful. That's all I'm saying now. And I hope you have a lovely day, whatever day you're watching this. And also just thank you so much for the nice comments that I've received. And I received so many messages, I can't answer them all. It's very difficult for me, but I'm incredibly thankful for everyone that supports and follows me and gives me good wishes, and I appreciate that very much, so thank you.